So PotGuide is a consumer resource for the cannabis industry. Essentially, our goal is to educate and connect consumers with relevant products and services for their needs. We also provide easy to digest legal information to keep consumers on the right side of the law. And basically, our goal is to be the consumer resource for marijuana and provide information and educational content, and really to help progress this industry from where it started until like where it is now and forward. So yeah, we're excited. So we got our start in 2013. Previously I had been involved in a few other startups, all internet-based. One was like a bartering site, another was like a business networking site, which we actually applied to Techstars in 2008, earlier on in that program. Got pretty deep through the vetting process and didn't make it at the end. And then another one, SwapRight passed it to I Saw You Dance, which is kind of like a humor site. And in 2013, I realized, we had legalized cannabis in Colorado. Commercial sales had yet to begin. And there was a lot of interest in people who wanted to visit the state. And the initial purpose of the site was really to educate those visitors on what to expect. Because at the time, there's really no quality online resources for people looking to visit here, especially as it related to cannabis. So that was the initial intent, was to provide an insider perspective. Here's what's allowed, here's what's not allowed, here's what the locals do and you can kind of get away with. And then complement that content with some directory showing people where to buy, where to stay, and what to do. So dispensary locators, 420 friendly lodging directories, and then listing all the activities, events, and tours available. So that's how we got started. And when the site launched in 2013, it was very basic. It was maybe like 5 or 6 pages. At that point, we didn't even have a blog integrated yet. And I had a full-time job. Like, my background's in finance. I graduated during like the dot-com boom. And it was funny because a lot of my friends were developers, and I saw like all the money they were making and how they had a much more lax work environment. And I was in the finance world, which is very kind of stiff and like suits, and my friends were wearing like shorts and playing hacky sack at work. So at that point, I kind of started studying programming and kind of combined those two things. So for a lot of my career, I've done like programming for the financial industry. And so, I knew how to build the websites, and I knew about cannabis, and that's originally why I put this site out there. Was, I wanted to get the information out, and it was something I could do myself without a lot of like capital resources. So launched in the fall of 2013. I had a full-time gig, and in 2014, it really started getting a lot of media attention. Mainly because all the coverage of was taking place in Colorado, and which is great, right? We got backlinks from like huge news organizations, and traffic started growing more and more. I think the end of 2014, we were doing about 200,000 visitors a month, which isn't a huge number, but is much larger than I anticipated. And at that point, I realized, hey, this is more than just a website. This is a viable business at this point. So quit my full-time job to focus 100% on PotGuide. At that time, Samantha Chin, who's a co-founder, she was doing some consulting work mainly related to marketing and social. She came on full-time as an employee at the beginning of 2015, and that was the same time that we joined the Canopy Boulder Startup Accelerator Program, which, for people that don't know, it's a cannabis accelerator focusing on ancillary companies, so companies that don't grow or touch the plant. And so we were part of their inaugural class in the spring of 2015. When I started the site, I always wanted to get I was trying to think of domain names, and it's very hard. And at the time, there's like a lot of Web 2.0 names ending in LY or whatever. And, so basically the issue is finding a domain name that's available to use for your company. So I researched a lot, and I liked PotGuide, but I reached out to the people who owned it. It was just a park domain at the time. I think they wanted like 30 or 40K for it. And I was like, listen, I'm just doing this like as a resource, not really like trying to, make this a big business at the time. So I was like, I'll just register Colorado PotGuide for like $12 instead of, what they were asking. So, but the problem was obviously is, once the site took off and it became like a viable business in Colorado, obviously we needed a different domain name to expand to other geographical areas. So at that time, I reapproached the people about obtaining the domain name. We negotiated and settled upon a price. And so now we still have currently 2 websites running side by side. And the plan is to merge them. The end user experience is all very cohesive. But obviously when you start merging domain names, there's a certain risk of impacting your search engine traffic. basically in the short term, and being a small company with limited resources, we were just looking to kind of mature a little bit before we did merge the sites. So I feel we're at the stage now where that makes the most sense. But yeah, it's been kind of, been running side by side now for a few years. Yeah, so education's been our focus, right? I think that's crucial to the growth and development of the cannabis industry. Cannabis may not be new to like everybody, but the legal cannabis industry is new. And so regardless of how long you've been consuming or known about the plant, I feel anybody can learn more about this legal industry and how they can participate and benefit and whatnot. It's again, we started off as a very static website. It was static content and the directories, and over time we've gotten, we've kind of been evolutionary how the site kind of developed, adding features here and there, just building upon, our traction month over month and just kind of listening to user feedback. And it's taken a long time, right? Because we don't have these large development teams that some of our competitors have. But with that said, I feel like with ambition and focus, we've been able to achieve like a lot with our limited resources. And, I'm really proud of our team, what we've been able to do. Right. So we're mainly B2C, and a few different ways. That's one thing that we're fortunate enough to have diverse revenue streams. So with the dispensary directory, we kind of run a freemium model. So we list every dispensary in every state that we enter. And the reason why we chose to do that was, as a consumer, I always wanted to see all the options available, right? And some of our competitor sites, they only list the paid advertisers. And I always felt like, that's great, but I'm like, what about all these other places? And so we try to be very consumer focused with our vision. And, so we list everybody. And although, we're giving up some free exposure to do that, I feel like overall it just creates a lot more confidence from consumers in what we're providing, the information we're providing them through our directory. So with that said, we list everyone, but we do have a couple of paid tiers. And so those are basically monetized on a per store location on a monthly basis. So just depending on how competitive the market is really dictates the monthly cost. But dispensaries account for about 40% of our revenues. We also have a lodging directory, and we list both commercial as well as private lodging options. The lodging directory mainly monetized through commissions. So we actually partnered up with Expedia. Funny enough, Expedia is actually somewhat interested in the cannabis industry, which is unique to find with these larger corporations because a lot of them are still very scared about having any type of relationship. So we've been working with them a couple years, and that's been great. We'd really like to work with bigger sites like Airbnb and HomeAway because the private lodging sector of the cannabis industry is very large. There's a lot of hotels you can't consume in, and a lot of consumers really want to be able to like consume and combust cannabis like while on their holiday. With that said, it'll be interesting to see how social lounges impact the marijuana-friendly lodging activity, just because if people have other options to consume, like in terms of places legally, they might be less likely to get a cannabis-friendly hotel room. And then the activities and tours, we actually offer direct bookings through our website. So you can come on PotGuide and book a cannabis tour, or all the different like activities like cooking classes, etc. And so we monetize those through a commission-based model as well. In addition, we also have affiliate relationships, so we're a very content-heavy site. So a lot of it involves our content strategy is somewhat based upon what products are related to this article that we can kind of provide exposure to, and obviously if people make a purchase, then we get a commission on that. We also do sponsored content, so if different brands and businesses are looking to gain some exposure in the industry, they'll talk to us. We try to come up with a content piece that isn't just pushing this brand down people's throat, but like kind of addresses whatever area of the industry they're involved in a more kind of passive angle, and then naturally incorporate the business into the content. And we feel it's really beneficial because it provides exposure, but it also comes across, and I feel it is very authentic. And we're not just, it's not just fluff articles promoting some brands. So sponsored content, and then as well as display advertising is our final revenue stream. Obviously getting more and more challenging in today's markets. With ad pop-up blockers and things like that. You hear in the news all the time about all these media companies are kind of struggling to kind of figure out how to grow, and it's an issue. I mean, if we didn't have these other revenue streams like the directories and whatnot, I would see how that could be problematic. Some of our competitors are strictly focused on display ads, the more content-heavy sites that don't really have the directories. And yeah, I mean, it's just I'm not quite clear on how that's a sustainable model at this point. So yeah, Expedia was great. We reached out to them, and there was some concerns. They had to talk to their legal department, but we came upon an agreement where we're not going to promote a hotel as cannabis friendly unless they specifically give us permission to do so. And that is kind of why it's kind of been somewhat slow in getting commercial listings on our site, because a lot of these traditional hotels, I mean, they're concerned about alienating their existing consumer base. So, but at the same time, they realize the money that cannabis tourism brings in. So it's it's a difficult position. I understand their point on the matter, but over time, we've actually seen it becoming more normalized, and we've seen lodging providers become more and more receptive to accommodating this market segment. And I expect it will continue to increase like that. With that said, I mean, the funny thing is in Denver, we see a lot of what we call opaque commercial listings, which are commercial hotels that accommodate cannabis tourism in some context, but they don't openly promote themselves as such. So we have quite a few of those in our Denver directory, and they're listed not as this is insert major hotel brand name here. We can't use their name, so it's more advertised as like a 4-star hotel in central Denver. So basically the consumers can't know which hotel until they actually book. And we actually aren't involved in those bookings. We actually refer to a third party who kind of manages these opaque hotel listings. But I know right out bat, like the commercial opaque hotel listings in Denver alone are probably around 10 million a year. So it's a big money maker, and a lot of people come here and there's a lot of options like for consuming illegally. I mean, obviously people can get smoke in the streets or the alleys, but a lot of people come to Colorado because they don't want to be breaking the law. They don't want to be looking over their shoulder. And because Denver has been so slow in rolling out the Initiative 300 social lounges, really the only legal place to consume as a tourist is in a private residence or a commercial hotel. So, and that's kind of why people are willing to pay a premium just to book these hotel rooms. On the flip side, we're still running into issues. Some businesses are like, no way. I mean, not just vendors, but things like health insurance, dental insurance, like banking. I mean, these are all huge issues for us. And even though we're ancillary, it still affects us. And we're a media company. And for example, the banks say, hey, well, you're a media company, but a lot of your revenue is directly from dispensaries. So they're saying, your revenues are one off the drug chain, right? And so basically, I mean, I don't think it's like a moral issue. It's just more like people are concerned with, their legal exposure for working with companies in the cannabis industry. But, we hope as Congress acts on some of these bills that have been introduced recently that'll alleviate some of these pain points, reduce the friction, and we'll be able to operate like a normal business. Every time I go to the bank and make a deposit, I'm a little bit concerned about, if they're going to question what we do. Because, we have a few different banks, but the one we primarily use, it's kind of a stealth account. We're just listed as a media company and nondescript name. But when you're depositing a bunch of checks that have cannabis-related names on it, it's a little bit uneasy. And yeah, we know plenty of companies that have lost their bank accounts at, major banking institutions like Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of the West. So yeah, it's unfortunate, and I'm really hope it changes soon. We definitely have a lot of what we call easy to digest legal information. So we take all the complex marijuana laws, try to break them down into very simplistic terms so that people who are traveling can research ahead of time and determine what's allowed and what's not allowed. So that content on our site is very popular, but of course our dispensary directories are also really popular. Just again, because we list everybody and people are starting to realize, hey, this is a great site that shows us all our options. Dispensary deals have been picking up. That's another thing we're really pushing. It was kind of a natural extension of our dispensary directory just to add the deal functionality. So that's been really great. But Samantha Chin, the co-founder, she's done an excellent job along with Michael Walters, who's our content manager, in determining a content strategy to acquire new visitors to the site. I mean, we've always been kind of bootstrapped, so we've had to come up with creative ways to kind of market ourselves and generate traffic to the site. And content is one way that we found we've really been able to do that well. And so with a solid content strategy, it's just, I mean, basically we did 1.3 million visitors last month, and that was all organic search engine traffic. And a lot of times people ask, they're like, well, you know, you have great SEO, like, you know, who's your SEO company? And the reality is there's no SEO company. I mean, we implemented a very basic SEO strategy, but what it really comes down to is just putting out quality content, making sure like visitors to your site have a great end user experience, and don't try to like cheat or like break any of the rules by like doing black hat techniques. And I feel like if you know, follow those guidelines, eventually you'll get recognized for putting out quality content, original content, and you'll get the visitors to your site. You know, we were a little lucky because like the timing was right for us in terms of starting off early, so we're able to secure a lot of these high ranking keyword terms early on, and we've maintained them now for, you know, over 4 years. On a side note, I mean, I was really concerned about that when in 2014 because it was great to see all the traffic. And that's kind of why I waited to the end of the year until I resigned from my full-time job to pursue this, because you never know, right? I mean, a little change with Google's search engine algorithm, and next thing you know, like your traffic's cut in half. And you know, it's something to think about. So, you know, we came out of our accelerator program in July of 2015. And, you know, it was a great program. Like we made a lot of contacts, a lot of acquaintances. It definitely helped with a variety of different aspects of our business. But the investor circle that we initially got introduced to was somewhat limited. So we really had a lot of trouble trying to raise funds in 2015. Essentially, the media play wasn't as interesting to a lot of investors as some of the other opportunities in the cannabis industry. And as well as, you know, there was the investor circle we got introduced to, a lot of their members had invested in a couple competing companies to ours. So the investors that we did actually get introductions to, they kind of saw us as a threat to their existing portfolio of investments. So basically we took a step back. You know, we tried to raise funds for maybe like a couple months, and I just realized, hey, let's just focus on working on the site, increasing functionality, improving our product, increasing visitor acquisition. And so yeah, we worked out of my house for I think 7 or 8 months, and you know, Samantha was in one bedroom, I had a little office there, our developer was at the kitchen table, and I mean, we were bootstrapping it to the extreme. But I mean, I think we all felt confident that we'd be able to, you know, get the metrics and the numbers we needed to really start, you know, generating additional revenue, and that's exactly what we did. I mean, it was a little painful. In the end of 2015, we actually did see a bit of a drop in traffic, you know, about 10 or 15%. And it was late in the year, it was like November, December. And I started getting like really concerned. I'm like, oh no, is this the new trend, or like we going down? But the reality is we bounced back. And as over the years, we actually have like a bigger data set now, right? In 2015, we only had like a year and a half of data on the cannabis industry in terms of what seasonal, you know, impacts there are on like a website like ours. So now we know historically that November and December are quieter months, and then it always takes off Christmas Day. It's funny because I think like families get together, they have discussions, and then they kind of think like, well, hey, let's plan some type of cannabis-focused trip somewhere. And so every year on Christmas Day, we all see like a huge uptick in traffic, and that kind of carries through all the spring. So yeah, you know, I think like dealing with like dealing with capital restraints is a big part of it. Obviously, you always kind of want more money, but I mean, the cannabis industry is so difficult. You got to watch your cash flow. If you run out of money, there's not going to be no one there to just give you money to work with really quickly. I mean, you can't go to a bank and just take out a quick loan or anything like that. So, you know, I've seen a lot of companies in this industry overspend and then run out of money, and that's the end of them. So, because of that, we've also incorporated a very conservative growth strategy, and you know, it's obviously sometimes a little frustrating. Like you want to grow quicker, you want to have those funds to really kind of get the exponential growth going, but at the same time, you know, you always got to be careful because you never know when you're going to run out of cash. 420 is obviously a huge period, and as we've diversified to different geographical areas, we've kind of seen it get a little more consistent versus Colorado, right? You have the summer, and then you have the ski season in the winter. That's when the majority of tourists are coming here, not like the spring and the fall. But now, like in all these other markets, it just varies. And overall, now if you look at our aggregate like traffic numbers, I think we're like seeing a much less variance from month to month, just because of the diverse geographical regions that we have content for. It's funny because people look at the cannabis industry. I mean, we interview people all the time, and some people think it's just like any other business, right? Like it's fun, it's an interesting topic, but it's still work, right? And people are like, oh, are you consuming all day? And I'm like, no, I'm like, if you work in a brewery, you're not drinking all day. And it's much the same here. We're like, sure, occasionally there's consumption at the end of the workday, but I mean, we're all very busy. We're a small team, so we're all wearing many hats and multitasking. And I just feel like you have to be on point to be able to manage all these different things. So we interview a lot of people, and we usually ask one question. We're like, well, what's your relationship with marijuana during the interview? And it's a funny question to ask because some people, it just seems kind of almost like a surreal question. Like some people actually, you can kind of see them squirming. They don't know what the right answer is. And there is really no right answer, but we just, we're just interested in seeing like people expect, like if they think that we're smoking all day or if that's what their desire is. But yeah, again, I mean, it's just like a traditional industry. We are dealing with the stigmas obviously involved. People are eager to work in this industry, so I have found it's a little easier for us to get candidates in front of us to interview. But the skill set, the quality of candidate varies widely. And again, I think it goes back to what people's expectations are for working in this industry. My favorite part is like when we actually go out to events and do pop-ups and whatnot, and actually hearing from the end consumer how we've been a really useful resource for them. And it's great to hear people that plan their whole trip and they're like, they plan their entire trip on our site. And it's funny because like in 2015 we do these events and we'd be like, PotGuide, and they'd be like, who? And so it's been rewarding to see over the years our brand get out there, brand recognition and improve year over year. And now usually most of the people you talk to, it's more likely they do know about us than don't. So that's been really rewarding. And then also it's helping the businesses as well too, right? So, our whole freemium model, we list a lot of businesses that, especially the early stage, smaller companies, like say like activity or tour providers, as well as some of the mom and pop dispensaries. I mean, they're very appreciative of like the exposure we provide them. And especially since we're doing it at like little to no cost for them in the beginning. And what we've found is that gains a lot of respect with them. So when we approach them with the metrics, here's how many people referred to your store, that they're very receptive to, becoming a paid client of PotGuide. And, it kind of goes with our philosophy of not being like high pressure sales or too pushy. Like I always felt like no one likes to be sold, right? And so we feel like if going in with that angle, just being like, hey, we're here to work together and grow together, it's been well received by the industry. And, I think it's paying dividends. I mean, of course, we could be a lot more aggressive with it. And I think short term, we would see increased revenues with that strategy. But I think long term, it's not gonna work out well. So, slow and steady growth is kind of what we've been focused on. And and it's really been working. Yeah, so we were trying to raise funds in 2015 is when we first got out there. And lucky enough, like when we entered the startup accelerator in the spring of 2015, we had some very moderate revenues. Nothing great, but enough to sustain a few employees. And so after the accelerator program ended, we initially talked to, not a massive investor circle, but we definitely talked to a fair amount of people. And it was a really interesting experience. I mean, we got like a couple soft commits that later kind of backed out. And I mean, it's the least favorite part of the business for me is just dealing with investors. And because I'm very realistic when it comes to like, growth and revenue. And I try to put down accurate numbers that I think were achievable. And I think it was a little frustrating to see some other companies that have these unrealistic hockey stick growth projections, actually get funded and have investors just buy into these huge revenue estimates, which almost never come to fruition, right? And so I think one of the areas I probably could have performed better in raising funds was maybe playing into like what the investors wanted to hear versus like what I thought was like, you know, a very safe, conservative approach to like modeling this business. And so that's one thing I took out of it is kind of, you know, it's hard because I mean, even now I'm like, I still wouldn't feel good saying, hey, we're going to be doing 10x in revenue, what I really believe we're going to achieve, you know? And so, but what I've seen with other companies is that works a lot of the time. So I don't know, it's just a matter of finding the right person who wants to invest in your company. And there's so many different investor personalities that, you know, if you talk to enough people, you're going to find a good fit. It's just a long, tiring process to get through, you know, all these meetings and constantly updating your models. And I mean, our model is very complex. It's really hard to like guesstimate a lot of these different variables. And, you know, a lot of times I wish we were, you know, made widgets and I'm like, the widget costs this much to make and we sell it for that much and, you know, here's our margin. And like, you know, modeling something like that just, you know, sounds like a dream to me versus what we're trying to do with PotGuide, because PotGuide is basically a complex ecosystem, right? We have the visitors to the site, we have the advertisers and the businesses, and you know, making sure all those are in somewhat equilibrium as the site grows, because you don't want to take on too many paid advertisers without increasing your visitors, because otherwise their numbers will go down, and then you're dealing with a higher churn rate. So it's really kind of complex to be able to make sure that you're not overselling certain areas without having the increase in consumer traffic to justify that. And I think that's, you know, that's one thing that we deal with all the time. Luckily, you know, our traffic's been consistently going up month over month for many years now. But still, I mean, we have to be careful about, you know, bringing in too many advertisers in certain markets. So I worked for CNET Networks for a couple of years early on in my career. I freelanced as a web developer and software developer for many years. And yeah, and I had experience with a few different startups. But yeah, I mean, that whole balance thing I was very concerned about from the very beginning, right? Because, you know, when we had one advertiser in Denver, when we added the second one, I was like, oh no, are there like metrics going to get cut in half? And then we realized, specifically, for example, the dispensary directory, with the whole freemium model, what we found is when we feature more and more, when we actually convert more stores to the paid tiers, the stores that actually lose traffic are more likely to be the basic listings instead of the other paid ones. So overall, it's been, you know, it's been pretty straightforward, but you know, it's all something to be concerned about. You know, it's never good to talk to your customer and be like, they see the numbers go down, right? They want answers on why that's happening. And if you tell them it's because we signed up like 40 more advertisers, they're not going to be really happy with that answer. It's interesting, you know, we've seen in certain markets like Colorado, it's gotten a lot more competitive. Margins are shrinking quite a bit. I think like wholesale marijuana is selling for about $800 a pound now. Last year at this time it was around $1,500. And so things are getting much tighter for dispensaries. And what we're seeing is in the early days, they were just kind of throwing money around at different, you know, advertisers to see what worked and what didn't. Now they're getting much more analytical, and we basically, almost all our different dispensary clients, they want to do, you know, regular reviews going over all the numbers. You really have to prove your ROI. And if you're not proving your ROI to these businesses, they'll drop you in a second. And so we found that, you know, these more mature markets, you know, it's just not as profitable as it perhaps used to be. With that said, you know, other newer markets like Massachusetts, Florida, they're kind of basically at the stage Colorado was in 2014. So it's not very competitive. Prices are much, much higher. The profit margins are huge. And so they're more likely to, you know, have much larger marketing budgets. We're very focused on brands and businesses. Another interesting thing in the cannabis industry is, in the earlier days, people would be loyal, you know, during the medical years, for example, in Colorado, dispensaries had to grow 70% of their own flower. And so a lot of the reasons people go to a specific dispensary was based upon the quality of flower and product that they produced. What we see now in the recreational market is more and more people focusing on branded products. And of course, branded products are somewhat agnostic to whichever dispensary you're going to. It's much like a liquor store, right? So like if you have a favorite beer, you're not too concerned about what liquor store you go to as long as they carry your brand of beer and it's not too overpriced. As well as some other maybe other attributes like the location safe and nearby. So cannabis, obviously people used to be loyal because they had great flower. Now we're seeing them become less loyal, more focused on who has what products at what price. And so I think what we're starting to focus on is working more with brands. Brands have had a very limited place to market in this industry because Facebook and Google, they won't even accept CBD advertising, so those are out of the question. So they look to sites like ours, and so basically what we're trying to do is build out a business and brands directory. And for example, the brands, we want maps of just not dispensary locations. We want maps of all the places you can buy specific products. So the big goal is to get these data sets together to provide consumer intelligence in regards to what products are available where, at what price, and really just become a really go-to resource for convenience and information about different products that you may be interested in. Another thing we're really interested in is product recommendations, and it's something that some people are already trying to do to some extent. It's difficult because cannabis affects everyone differently, and what may make one person feel relaxed may cause anxiety in another person. But with that said, I do feel there's general guidelines that can help people, guide people to correct products to try to see if it is beneficial for them. And so, that goes with the whole educational aspect of our site is trying to steer consumers to the right businesses, services, and products for their needs. And yeah, we want to continue to build upon the information we have in our directories. But it's so early on, to be honest. I mean, it's really hard to kind of determine exactly how effective certain products are going to be for people until they actually try it. Well, it's benefited us and it's also hurt us because we actually, we're active on those social platforms also. And a perfect example is Facebook. We cannot boost posts. Our YouTube channel got shut down for a month earlier this year with no reason. Just took it offline with no notice. And then it just came up a month later with no notice. And so, and then as well as Google, of course, they ban all cannabis advertising. So the benefit to us is obviously cannabis-focused businesses have a lot less options for marketing themselves. So they look to sites like PotGuide to really provide exposure for their brand or service. So, it's an interesting time right now. I mean, it's still federally illegal, obviously, which is kind of a benefit for us because, if it was federally legal, we'd be dealing with some pretty big competitors already. And I feel like the legal status quo has provided us an opportunity for smaller companies like PotGuide to really kind of get our traction, plant our flagpoles in the ground in various areas before the floodgates really open. And so it's been an interesting time, but I have to admit it does benefit us, the legal status. And and that's something we have to be aware of too, because I mean, obviously when that changes down the road, it could change a lot of how our business is structured and how it's monetized. But again, it goes back to having diverse revenue streams. I think having a specialty site that's focused on cannabis, we're going to be able to provide information and value that directories like Google Places and Yelp can't really provide just because they're more generic and kind of designed for the broad spectrum of different industries in their directories. So I lived in Boulder for 17 years, moved to Denver, and I just really thought it was a really great environment. I mean, Boulder's great. Obviously, it's smaller, really expensive, and Denver. I mean, we're at the forefront of the whole cannabis revolution, right? I mean, it was funny. I remember, I went to CU Boulder in the '90s, and I remember going to a NORML meeting, which is a cannabis advocacy group, in 1994. And we had a state legislator come in to speak to us. And he was saying I'm on your side, but he's if I come out and say that, it's political suicide. And he's a lot of my colleagues feel the same way. And he's we're for it, but if we say we are, well, we won't get reelected, right? And so, it was another 20 years past that before, things got legalized. So it was interesting to see that progression, but it was just the forefront of everything. And of course, Denver's market started off pretty small also. I think there was 11 or 12 dispensaries on January 1st, 2014. And to see it grow, it has been really, really interesting. Obviously there's really good candidates around here for any positions that we have. It's central, so we feel like when we do have to travel to different events, we're in a great geographical location to make that easier. And who doesn't love Colorado, right? Emotionally, you got to be pretty even-keeled. It is a roller coaster. You'll get great news one day and be all excited, and the next day it could be like something completely different hits you. And so, you gotta, it's kind of cliche to say it, but you just gotta go with the flow and be able to handle these different ups and downs. Because emotionally, it can be very taxing, especially when you're bootstrapping it and you don't have the resources that you feel you really need to get to where you want to be. So a lot of it is just, heads down, just kind of stay focused. Don't let your emotions, take control of you too much. Obviously, just be confident in what you're doing and do what you love, right? You got to be involved in an industry that you enjoy. That's exactly what I'm doing, right? I was interested in the cannabis industry. I think it's great. And so, it's just, a lot of work, but as long as you enjoy it, it's, it doesn't seem like work. And that's my advice for anyone starting off. And also be realistic with certain milestones. Some people basically set these huge, very difficult to achieve milestones. And when they don't hit it, it's just like a huge downer. And, I've seen companies basically go from roaring engines to like sputtering on one cylinder, all because they missed a few big milestones. And, team morale drops down a bit. So, as long as you stay focused and you have fun, then I think, over time you'll get to wherever you're looking to be, one way or another, right?